All right. I think we have a crowd for us to get started. Um, Dr. Nyanzi, are you there? Dr. Nyanzi?
Yes. Hi. I'm here ready to get started.
All right, all right. Today, I think we have a lot of people, especially from Uganda. My name is Monicah Kariuki. You are on Echo FM. We are both on radio and live on Facebook. Today, we have Dr. Stella Nyanzi. I'm going to let her introduce herself so she can briefly tell us what she does, why she got here. Dr. Nyanzi, welcome to Echo FM.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you for inviting me and bringing me to, thank you so much. I appreciate that you're giving me voice at a time when many would rather take away my voice. My name is Stella Nyanzi. I'm a Ugandan currently in exile in Kenya. What else am I? I'm a mother of 3 children. My daughter is aged 16 and my sons are aged 13. They're twins. I'm so many ex-things. I'm an ex-convict who was acquitted by the High Court in Uganda after Yoweri Museveni, who's the so-called president of Uganda, charged me twice in court for offensive communication and cyber harassment. In one of the cases, I was found guilty. I was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison. And I appealed against both the sentence and the conviction. And having served about 15 months, I was then acquitted by our High Court. So I'm an ex-convict, an ex-prisoner, an ex-Museveni offender. I used to be a research fellow. I studied medical anthropology. I have a PhD from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. In what seems to be like a life far away, many years ago, I used to be a research fellow at Makerere Institute of Social Research. I cannot practice anymore again because of political persecution. I criticized Janet Museveni, who is Yoweri Museveni's wife. I criticized her for lacking the education qualifications to be a minister of education. And I also shamed her using writing. That was quite brutal in its honesty. And she abused her office as Minister of Education and ensured that I was not only suspended from Makerere University, but I was then terminated. So I'm a research fellow who is not practicing because of political persecution. I'm also a former Kampala woman member of parliament. I contested in the last elections and I didn't go through. The elections were held on the 14th of January this year. And what else am I? I'm very many exes. But in terms of introduction, I guess that is what I am. Can I stop there for now? I'm a member of the opposition in Uganda. I belong to the Forum for Democratic Change, or FDC. And that is my political party. Currently, I'm an exilee on holiday from oppression and enjoying the hospitality and freedom in Kenya.
Okay. All right, Dr. Stella. I actually got in touch with you because I saw a video of yours and you talked a little bit about domestic violence, and then I started to follow you, and so from there I picked on your politics, and things like that. So today I kind of want us to talk more about politics, and I know you are running for office, but then so as we get started, President Museveni has been president for over 30 years. There has been leaders like Kiza Besigye and now Bobby Wine, who've tried to unseat Museveni, but they have been unsuccessful. They haven't succeeded to unseat him. Their families, their supporters, they get state machineries unleashed to them. Do you think Uganda will ever have real democracy?
Right. I mean, your question is interesting because on the one hand, you're asking if my country, Uganda, will ever have real democracy. And I want to underline real democracy. On the other hand, you are listing members of or leaders in our opposition, beginning with Dr. Chiza Besigye, who ran for presidential office 4 times. He was the presidential flag bearer for my political party, FDC. Last year, he chose not to run again because it would have been his 5th term. And you also mentioned Bobby Wine or Robert Chagulanyi, who is the leader of a new party, National Unity Platform. And the fact that you mentioned these alternative leaders of the opposition, leaders, presidential flag bearers of political parties, would give one the illusion of the existence of democracy in Uganda, right? If democracy is about getting representative leadership through participatory elections that happen regularly every 5 years, every 7 years, one would expect, because we've had these presidential candidates, that perhaps Uganda is democratic. So your question speaks to the real heart of the problem in Uganda, that what we have is a pseudo form of democracy. We have a performance, we have an act every 5 years. We waste a lot of resources and time and money, and we waste lives of Ugandans performing in this sham farce. It's a facade, it's farcical, it's not real. A pretension about going to the ballot to change our leadership and elect for ourselves a president that's elected by the people. And so my critique that's coming through right now is that what we have is some sort of performance, I think not really for Ugandans to practice our constitutional right to a regular, free and fair election. But what we have is a performance that is put on stage for our foreign donors, for whom 5-year performance, a pretension, an act about going to the polls is important. It kind of legitimizes the overdue stay of a dictator in power. And I think what's important is you ask about the future. As a member of the opposition, as a Ugandan mother to 3 children, if I don't hope that one day there'll be democracy in my country, I sell out my legacy. I betray everything that the opposition in Uganda stands for. It is important that in terms of the future of thinking about Uganda, we remind ourselves that democracy is possible. Democracy helps all of us, but we should live beyond the illusion of democracy that we have. If we are cognizant of the fact that what we have is a sham, what we have is a hollow shell, and then we choose to find means of taking that away and claiming back for ourselves the power to choose our own representative leaders, then we'll have made inroads into achieving democracy. So what I'm saying is there is hope that in future we shall be a democratic society. Right now, we are not there. As long as dictator Yoweri Museveni remains in power, using all sorts of illegitimate means, there's no democracy in Uganda. But there's hope for my children and their generation, that perhaps those of us who determine and purpose and commit towards fighting for liberation and reclaiming our constitutional powers from dictator Yoweri Museveni will be victorious one day. So there's hope, my sister Monica, there's hope.
All right, so you recently, like I mentioned earlier, you recently had presidential elections. Bobby Wine is your other presidential contender, and his family, they were put under home detention. We actually saw a video that made rounds on social media of his wife that was being dragged, on the ground by police officers in front of his son. Why is it that every, and I don't want to say this is all African countries, but most African countries, you know, where we, especially we have dictators, why do we always end up with these incivility during election?
So the abuse of women by men in power, the abuse of the abuse and shaming and indignity that women have to suffer at the hands of institutions and institutes of state in Uganda, the police, the army, all these paramilitary organizations that work on Yoweri Museveni's commands and orders, is outright misogyny. Misogyny is a hatred, a deep hatred for women and womanhood, right? The shaming of a woman in the presence of her son is not just inhumane, it's cruel, it's torturous, right? Security personnel are supposed to provide us, particularly the women and children, the girls and boys and women, with security of our persons, our homes, and our property. To think that the wife of a leader in the opposition can be desecrated so much in the presence of her children, in the presence of her son, right? And she's the wife of Robert Chagulanyi Sentamu, a member of parliament, a presidential aspirant at that time. If they can do that to her, what about a poor rural woman without voice, without power, without privilege, without cameras to protect her, and by covering her story and sharing it with the world, right? And so misogynist states, misogynist presidents, misogynist dictators such as Yoweri Museveni must be condemned by anybody who calls themselves a feminist. If you're not a feminist, but you have a sister, or a mother, a daughter, a wife, a girl in your life, we must all be condemning misogyny for what it is. He's not just a dictator who steals the ballot. He's not just a dictator who kills us with the bullet, but he's shaming mothers and wives and girlfriends and daughters and granddaughters and nieces and aunts and grandmothers in the presence of the men in our lives, but he's also using state machinery to do that. And your question is, why do African dictators do that? Why? And I think for me, rather than question the logic of dictatorships, because that we know, I think we should be questioning ourselves and saying, why do we allow it to continue, right? I'm a woman who believes in mass mobilization and believes totally that as citizens, we have a duty to reclaim our dignity. As women, we can do a lot. I mean, I didn't watch that video. It's a pity. But there are so many everyday incidences of violence against women. And we do not have to enter the space as combatants, fighting for the issues of men and the issues of state and the issues. She's a fellow woman, right? She's a mother like I am. She's a daughter to somebody. She's a wife of a leader, for crying out loud. And so for me, I would call upon the women's movement and feminists and every other woman who's oppressed in Uganda to say to them, we are the ones who are going to take over and fight for our own dignity, because seriously, our men are fighting for a huger, they're fighting against so many other things. And the women can participate in this sort of women-centric, women-centered causes, right? And so the women who say, I will not go to the streets to fight for food for children during COVID-19. And the women who say, I'm not going to speak against the president if it's about the ballots. And the women who say, those protesters and those activists and those human rights defenders are doing things we cannot do. But hey, here is an issue of a woman being terrorized in the presence of her son. And it's an issue that any woman can take on, right? Because we have children. And to that time, it was Barbie, Barbie, Bobby's wife. Tomorrow, it could be you who's sitting and saying, hey, those activists, shame. So the question about the African countries, for me, is important. I cannot speak about another country that's under a dictator, but I know that the question about women and the abuse and violation that is meted out against women. Why? I mean, why? is an issue that all women anywhere, everywhere can take up. And it's within our power. It reminds me of a very simple example of when Yoweri Museveni promised sanitary pads to girls in Uganda, and his wife, the so-called Mama Janet, went to Parliament, and she wasn't embarrassed to declare that there was no money in the public purse to fulfill this promise. Okay, it's a women's issue. Any woman who's menstruated, okay, knows the shame of going to school and having a leak on one's uniform. I am one of the most dry women. I can do anything, anytime, but I'm still shamed by the idea that I sat down and I want to raise up and there's blood on my dress. I can't just walk freely, right? So imagine a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old. And when that issue happened, I thought this is an issue that all women can participate in because we understand the issue. And we can shame the president using our menses and using the failed promise. So rather than ask about what other African countries and why it happens, I think we should be questioning ourselves as women who identify strongly with Barbie, with motherhood, with the shame of being brutalized in the presence of one's child. And it should be our duty to question our logic or the lack of logic thereof. Why are we sitting and doing nothing? Why did women mobilize around that issue? Why didn't we have other women sharing that video? How come I've never seen it? And so for me, the question must be rephrased so that it's relevant to allow other women to engage with our politics, because the abuse of Barbie Chagulanyi is my abuse, is the abuse of all women and all mothers in Uganda. And many times I tell my friends who belong to NRM, the current party, Yoweri Museveni's party in power, I say to them, one day, the issues that we face, they'll come and bite you. So if it's an issue about women and the violation of a woman in leadership, the wife of a presidential aspirant, it doesn't just touch Barbie or Stella, who is big-mouthed and doesn't love the current regime. It touches all women, and it should unify us to engage with modes of redress. And the state institutions, the police, the military must never be allowed to get away with touching women. And I think if we make our own incursions into questions of power and abuse of power, we contribute to the liberation struggle.
Okay. Dr. Stella, actually that video was widely shared, and there was outrage over that video.
Right. So I'm not a video person. I don't know where it was shared. I don't know how it was shared. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I didn't see it.
WhatsApp platforms. So most of the time when the videos are getting on WhatsApp platforms, they've been widely shared. But anyway, I just want to...
I don't do WhatsApp. Oh. I don't do WhatsApp groups.
Okay. So you probably missed it, but there was that video and there was outrage of both men and women because it wasn't right. Her son is the one that was going saying, leave my mommy. It was very, very heartbreaking. But I want to go on to the next thing, and I want to talk a little bit about corruption. For any democracy to thrive, it needs a strong judicial system to not only see personal liberties, but also to put check on government outreach and official corruption. How can Uganda combat corruption?
Right. So in Uganda, we can't do anything without first dealing with dictator Yoweri Museveni and just taking him out of the center of power in our country, right? Yoweri Museveni is the author of corruption in Uganda, right? If he wanted to address corruption, he would have, but it serves him. It helps to reward those who ensure that he remains entrenched in power, right? It fuels his bad politics. He pays off huge sums of money. He buys off people, I guess is what I'm saying. He buys off his critiques, he buys off his opponents, he buys off the opposition. He's buying. But also corruption ensures that he widens his capital, his own financial capital. He grows his own profits wherever they are. I've been shocked by the number of investments he has in Nairobi City. Like I passed by huge hotels and I'm told, that is Baba Museveni's hotel. And I'm like, fucking shit, is it his? And then I showed another asset. Oh, that's Museveni's. And I'm like, okay, if this is Nairobi, what about France and Switzerland and wherever else? And so I think because he's benefiting from it, because he's storing for himself and his children and his grandchildren resources from which they will withdraw when he's out of power, because surely he's getting out of power one day. He is not about to address the real factors that contribute to, promote, and maintain corruption in Uganda. I think for me, I mean, look, the entire financial system in Uganda, the entire investment, the entire capital, monetary capital system in Uganda is he sits in the middle of it. It all revolves around him. It rotates around him and his cronies and his people appointed into office through nepotism, right? Nepotism and cronyism, and often he's rewarding a sycophant for a service given. I think for me that foreign partners who give us bilateral aid and donor aid and multinational aid would have had a strong role to play in, controlling, kind of managing or putting a cap on the extent to which corruption in Uganda thrives. However, even the foreign partners are limited. I mean, we had the closure of DGF, a suspension of the Democratic Governance Fund, a huge fund that brought together a number of EU countries in terms of their aid to Uganda. And the arrogance with which that question was addressed shows that Museveni just doesn't care anymore, right? So before we can address corruption, we must go to the roots. Like, I think for me, a radical approach would be to first take out the dictator, who is the author, who authorizes every corrupt, dirty deal. And then we can deal with the question of corruption.
Absolutely. Do you think Ugandans are ready for a change, for a different phase?
Yes and no.
Yes?
Yes and no. So yes, I think that a number of us who are oppressed and don't benefit from the current regime, and we are in the majority, we are, the rural, the poor, those of us whose agenda are never addressed, we are aching for regime change. We are desperate for regime change. However, there are very many Ugandans who benefit from the status quo, right? There are very many Ugandans who are ripping large from the way things are. And they are the ones who defend the dictator, the corrupt leader, the misogynist I talked about, because they benefit from the current system. And those ones are not ready to have change. The third sort of Ugandans may not necessarily benefit, but they are so fearful because Uganda has had a deep history of violence and death and civil war. And many of them say, hey, I'd rather have the devil that I know, right? Than they're not sure who's the next leader and what sort of difference will that person bring. And so this third category for me is important because it shows that as the opposition, we have not done enough work.
So why?
Sorry?
I was going to ask, you said, some people would be thinking, I'm not sure about the other person because it's a new person. I would rather have, the devil that I know or the person that I have right now because that's who they know. But their life hasn't been any good. Isn't that a reason enough to want somebody else and take the chance?
And so that's what I'm saying, that there are those of us in the opposition who appreciate the need for regime change. And it's our duty. It is our duty to sell the importance and the urgency of regime change, right? Many of the people who would have wanted to vote for change but are not certain because they don't see an alternative leadership or an alternative party or an alternative policy of governance after Yoweri Museveni are older generation people for whom civil war and bloodshed are a reality they lived, right? And today they compare the bloodshed under Idi Amin, who was a dictator that terrorized Uganda, and they compare the poverty and lack that we suffered during Obote II, Milton Obote II, and they compare that to the relative peace and the relative development, the pseudo development, you know, houses going up and people having cars, etc., etc. And that illusion of Yoweri Museveni has indeed prospered Uganda in certain ways, allows them to be comfortable about the status quo. And I think I was saying that for me, that illustrates our failing as the opposition to show a viable and strong alternative. And so I've had people who say, yes, I agree with you, Stella Nyanzi. Yoweri Museveni is not perfect, he's not right, but who among all those people out there can do half as much as he has done for us? Who is thinking about our realities like he has, etc., etc.? And I think it is not fair to be judged against a man who's been in power for almost 4 decades. Of course, he's built a hospital somewhere. Of course, he's mended a road somewhere. Of course. But those few positives that he has then blind some of these people to the need for change, right?
Yeah.
And so excuses such as lack of experience, such as ethnicity, this man is of a different ethnic group, how shall we support him? Or, you know, people always get their own excuses, have ensured that the third category of people contribute towards Yoweri Museveni's return and stay in power.
Dr. Stella, I want to go to the next question. But before I do that, I want to correct myself because my producer just sent a message, and she verified that the video I referred to, it was not Bobby Wine's wife. So I apologize for that. I had seen on a different platform that was Bobby Wine's wife. So I apologize. So it was a random woman, but either way, the woman was being dragged in front of her son. So either way, it doesn't make it right. So I just wanted to correct myself on that.
Right, Chairman, thank you for the correction. And I want to thank your producer because for me, one of the things I've learned is that we must be as accurate, especially those of us in the opposition, that we must be as accurate as we can be, because many times we lose credibility when we're not accurate enough. Having said that, it doesn't matter. Let us imagine this woman was a domestic aide or a cleaner or a woman pumping fuel at a Shell gas station or a teacher or a farmer or whatever. I think for me that the issue of the state using state machinery that is supposed to protect citizens, the issue of using that power to violate women, it doesn't matter what sort of woman, whether she's wife to Yoweri Museveni, the chief dictator, or she's wife to a beggar in the street, she's a mother to a nobody, or she's mother to a first son, must be condemned with the utmost it deserves, right? And everything else I said remains the same. Right?
Absolutely.
So, sorry?
I said she absolutely did not deserve that. No woman.
Nobody does. And nobody deserves that. And I know that many times men say to me, well, Stella, are you saying it would have been better if it was a man? No, no Uganda, no citizen, no human being deserves to be violated and brutalized because the army has constitutional access to violence and the arms of violence. And they should be defending us against our enemies. They should be protecting us and our lives. They should not be brutalizing us. And so we must condemn every misogynistic regime, beginning with Yoweri Museveni, and going to any other that persecutes, torments women. I mean, we're just women. Isn't what they say? They say we're just women. And I think that we deserve to be protected, just as men do. Perhaps more than men as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for the sake of time, I want to go to the next question, and then I'm going to ask this question, and then I'm going to ask something else that came on about on Facebook too. So another crucial ingredient for a strong democracy is freedom of speech and ability to have a press, both formal as in news organization and informal as citizen journalists, being able to freely express their ideas and opinions without fearing repercussion from the authorities. You have been arrested, interrogated, and tortured by Museveni regime. Post-election, internet was shut down for an extended period of time. How high is the cost of freedom of speech? I know I tried to reach you because this interview was actually supposed to happen right after your election, but I couldn't reach you at that time. So can you respond to that?
Right. So again, the closure or shutdown of the internet, the suspension of foreign correspondents, the intimidation of local journalists, the requirement for our journalists to be reaccredited, the introduction of attacks against social media, using social media, and the requirement for registration of people who use their social media platforms for news broadcasts. All of that are part of a regime of prohibitions that the dictatorship is putting in place. Why? Because the dictator is repressive. He wants to shut our mouths. Freedom of expression for me is non-negotiable, right? I think that Yoweri Museveni and his UCC is the Uganda Communication Council, will authorize and give permission to individuals, organizations, entities, platforms, broadcast and print outlets that praise them, right? That praise and showcase the propaganda about the development he's brought to Uganda. Those ones are not touched. They are given amplification, right? And huge visibility. The sort of people that Yoweri Museveni does not allow to speak, he wants to take out our tongue and box in our voice boxes, are those of us who dare criticize him, critique him. Critique means you say this is good and this is bad. But for a person like me, I'm a dissident, I'm a dissenter, I'm a criticizer of the regime because I see nothing good in it at all anymore. The little good that there was has totally diminished, evaporated. Museveni is like, And so freedom of expression, we must insist on it. That is all that we are left with. That is all. Civil society, taken away. Public media, the traditional one, TV, radio, print, taken away. Street protests and peaceful demonstrations, taken away. Academy, universities and colleges, taken away. And trade unions shut down. Cooperatives no longer exist.
political parties, especially those in the opposition, paralyzed. And parliament was brutalized by security, military men who came in and beat a parliamentarian. So they would change the constitution and take away the presidential term limits and the presidential age limit. So even parliament has been violated. Our courts have been violated, right? So the dictator has captured every small nook and cranny of freedom that we would have. The only surviving space we have is voice expression, especially on social media, but more and more using the creative arts. So music and plays and drama and, I don't know, poetry and literature. Those are spaces he's not yet penetrated, although they're starting. Freedom of expression must be non-negotiable. You said, what is the ultimate cost people have paid is death. People say to me, Stella Nyanzi, you went to prison because you wrote a poem about Yoweri Museveni. It was a dirty, dirty poem. Okay, it was dirty. So what? It was a poem. I use metaphors of the vagina and metaphors of the buttocks and metaphors of the penis. So what? We have these things and they're gadgets that make people stop and think, did she really say Museveni is a pair of buttocks? Yes, she did. Why did she say a pair of buttocks? After they say, she's insane. Then they say, but what did she mean? And sometimes they're laughing. And it is these new creative forms of address that Yoweri Museveni will stop and listen to. He doesn't listen to free speech. But the cost that I paid is a very small cost. People have paid with their lives. People are dying and dead. That is the ultimate price. Prison is a possibility. I went to prison. I was the Directorate of Public Prosecutions applied to court to have my head examined for mental illness involuntarily. And what they're trying to do with that is to discredit me as a serious voice of critic, voice of reason, voice of logic, right? And so pathologization, how do they say that? Making you sick, right? Making you mentally ill is one way they would do it. Taking away people's family. I mean, what tools do dictators use and not use? And I think that for me, what we must do is keep speaking, because at the end of the day, in my case, my voice is all I have. They took everything away from me, right? The only thing they can't take as long as I'm living is my voice, right? And my plan is to keep speaking out, to keep criticizing, to keep writing provocatively, because it is that sort of language that the dictator listens to. But I think that the language that I use invites others into the performance of ridiculing and mocking a dictator. And I think it is that which they try to control in my case, because I'm not saying Museveni is a corrupt man and producing statistics. I use metaphors that invite people to laugh. I create spectacles and scandal, and then we have a conversation about what was she doing with her nipples? Why was she expressing herself with her exposed nipples? Why was she addressing them at the justice? Because nobody talks to the justice and nobody talks to the judges and the courts. Nobody says to them, fuck you. But I did with my nipples in court. And that's important, because I think that the state has domesticated polite speech and diplomatic talk and the talk of lobbyists and advocates. They don't know what to do with creative modes of engagement, which is what we do. How do you shoot a poem? Huh? You know, how
Dr.
Yes,
Nyanzi,
go ahead.
you have said that you are an activist. You're talking about these metaphors that you've used. You use freely words like vagina, and buttocks. You use those words freely because as we're talking about, freedom of speech and what it costs. You said it can cost your life, but yet you still take on the streets. You're out there. So I actually wanted to get to something that somebody said a comment on my Facebook page, and they were talking about kuvua nguo, and you said yes, bring it on. About
kuvua means what?
Like taking off clothes.
Okay, because mvua means rain, no?
No. That's mvua, MV.
Right.
But kuvua, it's like removing clothes. So
to vua nguo.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's what I'm talking about, your metaphors, and you going as far as, showing off your nipples, to the judge. Can you just talk about that? What pushes you to that point that you have to be this extreme for your voice to be heard? And I'm sure, some of the things that you say, if it was a man saying, it would be acceptable, but that's just, our African culture. Some things are more acceptable when they come from a man than, when it comes from a woman, because of reasons that you had stated earlier. But I just want you to talk to our viewers and our listeners why you had gotten to that point of showing off your nipples or even taking off your clothes.
Right. So I think his name was Nelson, the person who commented. I thank him that he's not a gossip. Many other people will whisper about this behind my back and smile silently when they meet me, sometimes starstruck, sometimes in shock. But firstly, I want to say that having done those protest actions of undressing or nuding my body, they're very effective. And in terms of financial means, free of charge, totally free. Of course, there are other costs I incur, such as shame and insults and suspicions of insanity, but that's okay. That's okay. Because those I can afford. I can't afford money for lawyers or money for the repercussions of, preparing to speak to a judge about what they do. Why do I use these means? Why not? Why not? I keep saying to my friends, what has polite talk and respectability achieved for you? Okay. In the case at Makerere University, which was my first experiment with nude protest, I had waited and pleaded and appealed for 5 long years, in which a university acknowledged they gave me a contract that said I was a research fellow. I was appointed to do full-time research, and I wasn't supposed to be teaching, but this professor wanted me to teach on a PhD, and teaching on a PhD program means total overhaul. I'd be doing 2 jobs without changing my contract. And I appealed to all the different layers within the hierarchy, my organogram, from the institute all the way up to the vice chancellor, to the ministry and back. And nobody did anything. I sat in so many meetings. I had files upon files upon files of appeal letters and minutes, etc., etc., and it didn't work. Nobody took me seriously. The very men in those institutions were supposed to protect my labor rights and uphold my contract and uphold the human rights policy at Makerere University and uphold the Employment Act were complicit in the violation of my labor rights. The day that I undressed and used my phone to capture these pictures, the whole world stopped. Nobody does not know that Stella NYANZI undressed at Makerere University and shouted, "Fuck you, Mahmoud Mamdani. Fuck you, Mahmoud Mamdani." I did it at a time when morning TV was on, mothers were preparing their children for school, and fathers were rushing off with their sons. Why? For effect. I paid no money to get my story told. Maybe it was retold and mistold and untold and etc., etc. But everybody who had pretended not to know, that they got to know. I got an audience, the issues were put on the table for discussion. Okay. It took me, people said to me, "Why didn't you go to court?" I had no money. But also I know what it means to fight against a whole institute, because at the end of the day, the entirety of Makerere University was implicated. 3 years later, having sued them I won in court. They still haven't paid my money. They still haven't reinstated me. They still haven't promoted me, as they were issued by the High Court, as they were issued by the Bakari University Tribunal. However, the day that I undressed, I took my case to the public court, right? And I got the audience that I was craving to have. I got that audience very, very easily. So why? I think for me it's effective. I think that when women and weaker protagonists are pushed against the wall, we always have an alternative. When I was forced into that video recording room in the male prison, and the judge, the magistrate thought she had won, I pulled off my blouse and I pulled up my bra and I fought with my breasts. They were blazing like bazookas. Again, I was able to speak truth and power to the courts and say to them, we've had enough of this injustice. You know, our courts, which are supposed to be temples of justice, are not going to do this on my watch, right? Why do I do it? Why not? It works. It's very effective. And I think it's a very simple way of touching those who are untouchable in repressive regimes such as my country, Uganda. I think more people should be undressed. Sorry?
Are you ever afraid of backlash?
What's the alternative?
Okay, so are you ever, I know you're saying that it is effective, and I admire you for that. Personally, I wouldn't be doing it, you know.
I think that that day when your children's source of food is taken away from you, yes, and it's your last alternative, you will do it. But that day has not arrived for you. Thank the goddesses for your fortune, right? But the day when it's your last card and you must pull it out, you will.
I get it. So anyway, I see people on Facebook, they're laughing at that. Let's go to the next question, Dr. Nyanzi. So despotic leaders are known to manipulate their country's constitution to extend their terms in office. The populace still vote for them despite economic quagmires that negatively affect the voters. What is the disconnect here, Dr. Stella? Why do they vote against their own interest and well-being?
Right. So the first assumption I want to debunk is the assumption that populists vote for despots, right? We know for a fact that elections are rigged, right? Rigging of elections is a skill that every dictator, particularly in Africa, more so in Uganda, masters very quickly. And so many times the so-called popular vote is just deception. It's a lie. They've just stolen the vote. And I think that one of the things I have a problem with is the sophistry of the computer and computer algorithms, and the very fact that the opposition has not yet found ways to crack and work with computer software that's used to cheat for dictators. I mean, in Uganda, one of the things we must do as the opposition is find either our own alternative ways of overcoming this and working with the figures. If not, we have to find ways and methods of ascertaining and verifying the vote count. But to go to, so that's the first assumption, the assumption that there's a level playing field and that the vote count is an actual tally of the votes must be debunked. But I think the second issue that you raise touches on one of the points I made, that there are people who are indeed fearful of change and the status quo works for them. And they would rather stay with Yoweri Museveni because in their privileged cocoons, they are not touched by the violations and extremes of the dictator. The other thing I want to say is the monetization and overt commercialization of elections, right? People's votes are bought for a packet of salt, just salt, or kerosene, paraffin, I think it's called, a t-shirt, the allure or the false promise of that sanitary pad or that television for your children to do communal education, or that road that will be built in the next term. And many Ugandans, many poor people are gullible. We're just gullible. And I think that in the case of Uganda, Dictator Museveni knows the needs of each community, and he's promising what we want to hear, and people will give him the vote. He's mastered the tongue and how to use it, and he's very deceptive. And it is our duty, I think, as the opposition to know that we work with a very crafty person. There are areas where certainly elections were rigged in his favor, but I know there are also other people who have voted for him, like you say. They know he's not good for them, but they will vote for him because of propaganda and how it brainwashes. And we need to do the work of conscientization of the masses, right? Teaching them and showing that the grave behind your mother died in hospital because there was no medicine, because Museveni preferred to buy bullets as opposed to buying, medicine to help your mom through, and to make connections. As the opposition leadership must be able to make connections with people, because they're not making them for themselves. And the propaganda of the government, it's quite intoxicating. It's very intoxicating. It blocks one's clarity of vision. And I think fear is real, right? The fear of regressing back into the days when we didn't have good leaders, as if we have any good leader right now. But for many people, they vote for the dictator because they don't see an alternative. And if they see the alternative, it's not any better than himself. Have I answered your question?
I think you have. But as much as, because I don't think Uganda is far much better or worse than Kenya necessarily.
Uganda is far worse, my sister, far worse.
Then we do have a big population of poor people. And what actually brought change in Kenya is, the young generation that understood, the people that are now educated, that understood that our previous regime, we had Moi for over 20 years, so that generation is what made the change, but so in Uganda, you still are going through the same. You have a lot of poor people that are poor, are these people not feeling the pinch yet to want the change?
No, but then I've said to you that propaganda is powerful. Right? Propaganda is not just words. It's words that are lies that are told and people believe it. And we don't have a counter propaganda machinery. We haven't done enough teaching. I think that I keep saying to my friends within the leadership of the opposition that I meet, that we now have to teach, just simply teach.
Mm-hmm.
The liberation soldiers we have could be very, very many more, but there are those who don't see the need. I hang around university students a lot, and many of them are progressive and they are involved in the struggles of the day. Many others just don't care. He drives his car to the university, he has the internet, his daddy's got him a job, he's, and the issues we talk about are non-issues. And these are brilliant young people. I have circulated among young progressive feminists who belong to civil society organizations, and they don't understand the noise. Well, what's wrong with you guys? Like, why? they're professors, and so you're talking about poor people. I'm talking about academics who sit at the university and could make so much change, but the propaganda just blinds their eyes. So the first thing we need is to teach, not to teach A, B, C, but to teach about how dictatorships work and what they've done to us, the harm they've done to us. So the people you've called poor, that was the correlation as saying, to show a child that she's an orphan because of bullets that came from Yoweri Museveni, and he's responsible, although he's given her a half-baked school where she and other villagers sit, but she's orphaned because of him and his soldiers. And to make the relationship and the connection very clear, crystal clear, that is our duty that we haven't done as the opposition. Because many people say, but why? What is wrong with him? Why is he so bad? Many other people, especially the youth that you're talking about, he's the only leader that they've known. They don't know any better. They don't understand why we make so much noise about regime change, right? Many other people, poor people, are just content to live. I wake up and live and graze my cattle, or we thank the Lord because the rains are giving us a good harvest. We'll sell our maize. And so again, for me, I think that conscientization it's important. It has to be done using radio, using community meetings, using all those things. And unfortunately, the opposition is quite paralyzed, quite demoralized, quite disabled, but we have to work around the dictatorship and find ways of teaching and speaking to people. Why else would poor people vote for Museveni? Because again, like I said, the promises he gives, right? I'll build for you a school, I'll build a road. We shall take your cash crops to Kampala city and get them markets, etc., etc. And amnesia, like quick forgetting, people forget the promises he's made very quickly. He promised us food during COVID-19, posho or ugali flour and beans, and if one were pregnant, some milk and sugar. These things never came, but people still voted him en masse. Our children were not in school when we were voting. They hadn't been in school for a whole year. There hasn't been any structural improvements or changes made to our schools to make them usable by children. And the TVs and radios he promised our poor children to be distributed per village for them to study, they've forgotten this promise, right? So, and again, how do you remind people? By teaching them. So I think for me that while one would blame the poor, one would blame those who are not politicized enough, I think the blame falls squarely on us in the opposition. Those of us who believe we're freedom fighters, we haven't done a very good job teaching. But again, I recognize that our resources are limited and we have to use what we have. We have to use the little that we have in creative and innovative ways to ensure it reaches far and wide. Museveni one day will be voted out using the very same rigged system he's put in place. But we cannot afford to wait for that. I think we must begin organizing alternative ways away from the ballot to take him out using civil disobedience and mass civil action to disable him.
So, Dr. Nyanzi, there's with everything that you have said, there's actually a lot of similarities between Uganda and Kenya. As in our African people, they don't have long-term goals necessarily. It's about, the money I get today for the ugali I can put on the table today. And that's how, some of our people end up voting for the same leadership. So I can relate to that because, it happens in Kenya as well. But one of the things that really helped Kenya to get out of or to finally get President Moi out was that opposition, they united and they had one candidate. Do you think Ugandans or the leaders in Uganda can one day unite to have one presidential candidate or contender against Museveni? Would that be a better chance for unseating Museveni?
I mean, look, I think it's the only alternative that we have. So many people blame our party leaders, those of us in the opposition, they blame our party leaders for failing, refusing, being unable to unite and offer one opposition candidate, right? And on top of being stale news, okay, it's done, it's been done, okay? I think that people fail to understand the functioning or dysfunctioning of multi-parties in a dictatorship, right? The levels of suspicions across and among each other, the presumption of superiority over all others, the conflated sense or the exaggerated sense of ability of going it alone that we have as opposition parties, all of those made it impossible to unite. And I think perhaps it was good with hindsight. It was important, it was good, it was critical, it was good politics for us to each present a political contender for the presidency, because we showed the viability and thriving of an opposition in Uganda, which Museveni had dismissed and said by 2020 there'd be no opposition, right? So it's important. We had different political parties presenting different candidates. I think we had up to 10 or 11, I forget, 10 people who were who aspired against Yoweri Museveni. The issue of unity becomes much more important now that elections are over. Dr. Kizza Besigye, who was a presidential contender for my party for 4 terms, spoke with such clarity when he said that elections organized by dictator Yoweri Museveni are not going to oust him from power, right? And so calling for unity for me is not for us to call for unity so that we can have another election organized by Museveni, right? But it's for us to unite and find ways of reclaiming our power away from the structures and systems that Museveni has put in place to give him legitimacy, right? So we are uniting around the cause of liberation, of freedom, of reclaiming power for ourselves, or reclaiming our constitution, or demilitarizing our country. And those causes can cause us to unite. We need leadership to do that. I think it's possible. I think it's the only viable option. I totally believe that it is not going to be easy, but unless we unite, Museveni will run again and beat us at this game, especially if it's about elective politics. I think it's a sham. We all now should be at the place where we say we cannot beat Yoweri Museveni in elective politics. We can return to politics after the dictator is out and we have sorted out political parties, we have brought back democracy, we have, we have brought some sanity back to Uganda, but for now we need to unite and use alternative means of reclaiming our power and dignity and rule of law in our country.
Dr. Stella, I want to take a few questions from people that are viewing, and I have.
How do I see the questions?
If you.
How do we see them?
You can see them from Facebook, but I can also read them to you. Is that okay?
Ah. Okay.
Okay, because now I lost you, so I'll read them to you. So I have Julius Martins here, and he says, "What has been your achievement as a doctor?" And
as a doctor,
and he's also addressing what you addressed earlier, and he says that all we have seen is your news and vulgarity. How do you address people like that come to you that way? Again, we were talking about how men, if it was a man doing it, it wouldn't be this way, but now that it's coming from a woman, men take it differently. So how do you address people like Martin or Julius Martin?
So first of all, ordinarily, I would not address him, but I will, because I don't give importance to non-important issues. But then, because out of respect for you, Monicah, this person should thank you. I would not be responding to such a question. But first of all, it comes from a position of ignorance. I have a doctorate in anthropology of human sexualities, right? So my PhD that makes me called doctor, part of it focused on queer studies, part of it focused on medical health, so sexual health, sexual and reproductive health, part of it focused on sexual rights, right? Sexuality is my, when a baker bakes cakes, we don't say to them, why are you baking cakes? When an engineer, a mechanical engineer operates cars, we don't say to them, why are you driving a car? When a doctor cuts up a woman's stomach, we don't say, why are you cutting up a woman? But if someone else cut up a woman's stomach, it would be criminal. So when an expert of sexualities uses sexual language, I am doing what I was trained to do. When I take up, I'm a feminist, I'm a radical queer feminist. When I use my body in politics, I am actually applying what I've studied. And people should thank those who paid my school fees, beginning with the government of Uganda that paid for me to do a Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communication and Literature when I write poetry that is so effective, it offends a dictator 2 times. Yoweri Museveni charged me twice for my poetry and my writing that people call vulgar, and none of their polite speech has touched him. I am practicing literature, which I studied at Makerere University. So I don't want, when you see an idiot performing idiocy, you don't say, why are you an idiot, right? So when a scholar of poetry writes poems, appreciate it. I think the point you make about it's okay for men, but not okay for women is true to a large extent. But the other thing is the hypocrisy of us Africans. I know so many places where grandmothers go around saying, come on, Nyoko, come on, Nyoko, come on, Nyoko, okay? And it's an everyday word that grandmothers, maybe not so Christian, maybe not so moral, say all the time. The undressing that people find vulgar is an age-old, timeless weapon that so many mothers in Uganda, in Africa, in the world have used against people who abuse power and take away from them. So people who don't know our history as Africans think, it's so vulgar, you know? And so he says, what have I done? I have spoken truth to a dictator to the point that he had me incarcerated and exposed himself as being the most repressive tyrant in Africa. How do you imprison a mother, a single mom, for 18 months for a poem? She wrote a poem full of truths, right? What has the person who's asking me achieved? I have mobilized Ugandans to speak truth to power, using very simple tools such as poetry and song and Facebook. I invited many others to desecrate and touch the untouchables, such as the First Lady and the First Son. And the first time I wrote about Janet Museveni, I was threatened by people in the traditional media who said, Yoweri Museveni told us we can make fun of him, we can ridicule and make a mockery of him, but we should never touch his wife. I touched her again and again and again using poetry and verse, to the point that she had to come onto her first public address on, it was both televised and also put up on social media. She was saying she's forgiven me. The first time Janet Museveni had a public address, it was in relation to my mockery of her. But I think what I do cannot be done by everybody. It is special. It is unique, and often I tell people, I'm not inviting you to do what I do. The kitchen that I sit in is very hot. Go and build your own kitchen. Put in your own fire. Maybe it will be a gas stove. I cook with firewood, and I am burning banning the dictator in all ways that I can. I hope that the people who find my methods crude and vulgar and obscene and sometimes insane, I hope that their better methods are working, because at the end of the day, the issue is about Yoweri Museveni and dictators such as him, where he is in the NRM or where we are in the opposition. We must not reproduce oppression. And so I'm doing what I can. I hope that the person asking me, who never exposes his nudity or his vulgarity, is also doing something to effect change where he is.
I also want to read another comment here, and it's from Lucido, and he says the only opposition in Uganda is His Excellency Kayugulani. Was a film. Besigye was a film star who has done nothing apart from acting and acting the opposition. What is your response to that?
I think that Rukundo is an idiot, a blatant idiot. For anybody to dismiss the contributions made by any of the freedom fighters, especially those who have endured imprisonment, alienation from family, ridicule. Kizza Besigye was arrested countless times. I stopped counting. His body is maimed and twisted. His brother was murdered. I mean, Rukundo is an idiot. I don't take kindly anybody who is making a mockery of the contributions of freedom fighters. We shall not be discouraging our own, right? And so Robert Kyagulanyi is an impressive leader. Robert Kyagulanyi, who's called Bobby Wine by others, has worked so hard, but he is not the father, he is not the grandfather of the opposition. The opposition in Uganda has been working. There are people such as Paul Kawanga Semwogerere, who contested against Yoweri Museveni in the 80s, right? If we don't know our history, we cannot forge our present so that we change our future. And so for me, I'm sorry, Monicah, but I'm going to use your platform to call out idiots. And I think that we cannot afford to be stupid at this point. We must educate ourselves about the history of our liberation struggle as Ugandans. Otherwise, what Rukundo will do is to merely look at Kyagulanyi for counsel and fail to look at those historians who've made Kyagulanyi what he is. And I think it's very shameful because also Robert Kyagulanyi draws a lot of support and he acknowledges publicly the foundation that he drew from Kizza Besigye. And so perhaps we should stop giving audience to idiocy.
Dr. Stella, I have another comment here from
I hope it's not idiotic.
No. He says, Dr. Stella, miss you here at FDC. You should do some weekly Facebook live shows. Cheers.
Tell him thank you. Now that one is a brave person. Just say to him that he's aware that my Facebook has been on and off. I've been warned because I speak too harshly about particular leaders. But we'll find ways of participating in online platforms, perhaps a little more regularly now that we are in a space of safety where our voice is not threatened to be cut off. Thank you so much.
Dr. Stella, I have another question for you from, this is a little bit hard for me, but the name is Uzamukunda. And
okay.
I don't know if that is a she or he, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read. I like Stella, but ask her for me, if she had won the MP seat, would she still run Exile? And if country, country that had no democracy, why did she run the first time?
Right, so I just want to say to people who ask me that question that they are, would I run to exile? I think for me that they assume that I was contesting in the elections merely to win. I was contesting in those elections to get the public visibility that I needed to protect myself. I had left prison in February of 2020, and I was on the ballot in November of 2020. The very same year I was released from prison for criticizing Yoweri Museveni is the same year that we had the COVID-19 lockdown, is the same year that I suffered from kidneys because of poisoning. I was poisoned in Uganda, and I had to be admitted in hospital twice. And so for me, participating in those elections was really about increasing my public visibility in a time when the country was shut down. If I had won the parliamentary race and gone to parliament, there would have been immunity for me as a member of parliament. And many people say to me, Stella, that is not possible, because look at members of parliament such as Betty Nambose and Honorable Zake, who were beaten up by military even while they were members of parliament. And I would say that is 2 out of hundreds, right? Generally, there is a level of protection that comes to members of parliament, particularly if they are not targeted for punishment and penalization and violence by the state as a means of deterring others from doing what they do. So I think Betty Nambose was beaten up to the point of breaking her spinal cord because the state wanted to use her as an example. So she was targeted. Many members of parliament who just do their legislative roles are safe. And I think I would have been safer. To answer questions about what if you had and what if you had is to speculate. I think for me that the abductions, I was abducted in 2017 from a private car at night by men wearing masks. And we didn't have masks because we didn't have COVID-19 at the time. I was driven around Kampala city for about 4 hours. And after these men didn't have a police station that was willing to admit me, I was dumped into a police, a division police at Chira. Chira division is outside Kampala district, right? Having suffered the trauma of being an abductee, there was no way I was going to stay in Uganda to get abducted again when the abductions had come right into my household, right into my campaign team, because my lover, well, ex-lover now, and my campaign manager were both abducted in the time around elections, one just after the elections for the president and one a week before. So I was thinking, I'm not going to expose myself and my children to these abductions again. If there is no democracy, why did I run away? Because there's no democracy, that's why I ran away. I think that the name of the person you speak is either from Western Uganda or from Rwanda or from Burundi. And judging from the tone of their question, I want to suppose that they're pro-regime. So again, I'll say to them that when my father and mother fled from Uganda in the early 80s, they were fleeing in order to survive. Had they stayed in Uganda, perhaps we wouldn't be. Perhaps we'd be dead. But my father got to live again. My mother got to live again. We got to live again, although we were refugee children in Kenya. And I'm here today. I think for me, I fled from possibilities of imprisonment and abduction and murder from torture while being interrogated, so that I'd give my children an opportunity to live and make a change in Uganda or in the world, wherever we shall be. My parents were refugees. I am happy to be an exilee, and there's no shame in this for me. It's an opportunity to survive because, like I've said, a dead freedom fighter cannot fight from the grave. But I get a chance to live again and fight again, fight some more, keep tormenting Yoweri Museveni and his regime.
Dr. Stella, I want to take one last question here. And this is Aaron.
Right, Monica.
And he says, Let Dr. Stella, let Dr. Nyanzi tell us that she really think that it's possible for Uganda opposition can get coordinated, united, and front one candidate to challenge President Museveni, given their political egocentric behaviors. Otherwise, I am enjoying her honest deliberations. That's from Aaron.
Right. So, Aaron, I think that we have 60 months to organize ourselves. A lot can be done in 60 months. We should get going now. Again, having said what I've said, I don't think that the sham elections are the way to oust Yoweri Museveni from power. And I kept telling people that we have to look away from the elections and look at alternative means of reclaiming our power. And I think, and I totally believe, that in spite of all our problems, in spite of all our difficulties, in spite of everything that makes it impossible or difficult for us to unite, we can unite as the opposition. And unless we do that, we don't have enough quorum, we don't have enough quantities, we don't have the mass sizes to oust a violent, militant, brutal murderer, because that is what he is. And I think that we need the numbers to do this. We can be coordinated, we can be organized. We're going to coordinate ourselves and organize ourselves. And I think that the clarion call that should be made is for unity, perhaps not just to front one candidate, but to oust the dictator from power. And we can do it using different means, different approaches, but coordinated. So Aaron, yes, that is the only way for me that I see. That is the only way to go. And it's possible.
Okay, so very briefly, I'm just gonna read this one more. Give me just a second. And this is Jasper, and they're saying, I like you, Dr. Stella Nyanzi. We need 10 people like you. M7 regime to become history. Long live Dr. Stella Nyanzi. Long live People's President. Long live People's Assembly. One Uganda, one people. Wesiga Besige. Long live all activists for change.
That's a very sweet message. Thank you very much. It's good to hear someone who still believes in the cause. So thanks. That Jasper, was it Jasper?
Yeah, Jasper.
Right. That's a good note to end on. A note of appreciation. And maybe I should also thank you, Monicah, for inviting me and creating the platform. Sorry about the technicalities at the beginning, but we powered our way through. And I appreciate, thank you for sharing your audience with me. Where I caused offense, I apologize. I'm not sure I take anything back, however.
Dr. Stella, I wouldn't have it any other way. I appreciate your authority.
Sure.
If we didn't have people that are outspoken like you are, then we wouldn't make a dent or make any changes at all. So I appreciate you being outspoken, and you should continue being outspoken because you are fighting for something.
Thank you.
So I will talk to you after the show, because as we were talking, I thought about a few things, like I told you earlier. And for now, I just want to appreciate everyone that has tuned in, both on Echo FM radio and on Facebook. I appreciate all of you, all your comments. And if you want to support Dr. Stella, you can support her. Dr. Stella, do you want to give information if anybody wanted to support your campaign or anything, or your activism?
Oh, so I think that people should focus in on uniting for liberating Uganda. Personally, I'm fine. I don't have a campaign right now. Sorry?
Do people out there need to support you so you can continue with your activism?
I think for now that personally I'm fine. I am in a position where I'm just at the drawing table, drawing up new means of engaging with the liberation struggle in Uganda. And I just prefer that energies and efforts are put into the liberation struggle and, you know, supporting people in the country who are doing stuff for the country.
All right, Dr. Stella, I appreciate you giving me your time today. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. Until next Saturday, I will see you again next Saturday. Bye.
Thank you, Monicah. Bye-bye.